Fuck you, fuck your face, and fuck your day. What's good? This is your boy Tico, Tren. And I'm going to talk about Red Pill Scythe. I'm going to talk about the Tico Scythe basically tonight. On the other channel, it's going to be known as Devil's Advocate. I'm going to talk about things that kind of sort of came up and about in a way lately in the manosphere and around the manosphere and to other people in various topics in pop culture that, typically I'm not shocked about because it typically was going to happen anyway. But it's one of those things where you kind of sort of have to understand why it is and why it happened for all intents and purposes for it to come about. And what I'm talking about is the Bun B, not Bun B, Slim Thugger. Slim Thugger incident, basically. The thing about the Slim Thugger incident that a lot of people missed is he basically had a song that quoted, and I quote, "I don't take them out the streets. I don't take them out to eat. I don't take them out to. I don't take them out. I don't take them out to fix their weave. I ain't heard of that. I'm just here to train hoes. I'm just here to break hoes. I'm just basically that was his song before. If anybody's ever heard that from him, the sad part about that is what happens now is you run into a situation now later on in life where now this fool is saying stupid shit in his lyrics like women should be paid attention to and taken care of and stuff like that. And this is the shift that you usually get. So he basically went from the pimp dom game shit to dom submissive shit to, women should be paid attention and taken care of. This nigga was all about pimping hoes, smacking hoes, and smashing hoes. He didn't give a damn if it was your hoe or her best friend or her mom or anybody like that. Now this nigga's talking about when the whole entire Megan Thee Stallion thing happened. Now this nigga want to be a super simp and shit like that. So this nigga went from super pimp to super simp. And the sad part about that bothers me about this guy is it's not the fact that he literally went from super simp to super pimp. It's more so the fact that that progression literally came out of nowhere for a person of his stature. Because back in the days, he was talking about, smashing him and tossing him aside, basically. Now he's a simp now. And the sad part about that is now we live in a society where all our favorite rappers are turning into fucking simps. I'm not shocked about it the least bit, because at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, this is the society of people we raised. This is the society of people that's coming up. And this is society, that's the signs of a very, very soft motherfucker. Now I don't know if all the shit that he's rapping, he's sort of feeling guilty about and he wants to recant or take back. But typically how it works is a lot of times, a lot of these rappers, like I say, they're just rappers. They're basically just there for a show. They really don't practice the shit that they actually say. And that's one of the many things where I always talk about rappers and stuff like that, where it's like, the one Jeezy song is a good example of that. When I always say the one verse, everybody's switching up sides. Who can you trust? Believe what you want to believe. What's to discuss? I'm the type of nigga throw you the whip and ride the bus, but I still give a nigga my last enough is enough. That's typically my thoughts on it when it comes down to it. When it comes to black culture and, rap music and stuff like that. Because the same rapper that's talking about pimping hoes is going to be the same rapper that's switching up, talking about we need to protect women and they need to have a lot of attention. And I can't believe guys are doing this. From the nigga that was talking about pimping hoes, you ain't taking them out the streets, you ain't fixing their weave, you ain't doing all this shit where I ain't heard of that, basically, to this is what we need to do for women now. Like, if that ain't the most simping ass shit I've ever heard. And the sad part about that, when it comes down to it, you have to deal with people of this low caliber. And it's sad. It's really sad. It's really fucking sad. because the sad part about it is you'll get people who would do stupid shit like this on a regular basis, then wonder why things are happening, or you'll have your favorite artist that all of a sudden is going very soft on you and shit like that, and starting to do some very questionable shit. Then you're sitting up here wondering why your favorite artist is simping now, or like it's just one of those things that blows your mind at the end of the day when it comes down to it, because it's like, nigga, what? Like, you have to literally sit back and actually listen. You literally have to sit back and listen to some of the shit that's actually said, because at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, if you don't, or you don't catch it, it's one of those things where now you have to basically play catch up, or play. You have to backtrack to shit that you normally wouldn't have to backtrack to in the first damn place. So it's one of those things where it's like I said, 1 minute you're listening to Bun B. I mean, not Bun B, Slim Thugger, way back when he talks about, I don't take them out the streets, I don't take them out to eat, I don't even fix their weave. I ain't heard of that. I ain't here to change these hoes. I ain't here to change these hoes. I'm here to break these hoes. To We got to start, paying attention to women and treating women like queens, basically. Like what? Wait, what? And it's one of those things where it's like, it doesn't make any sense to me at all in the least bit. And the sad part about that is when it's all said and done, and when the smoke clears, you realize that your favorite rapper really wasn't pimping. He was basically a simp ass nigga, basically. It's simply how it works. Or you find out your favorite rapper really wasn't a gangster. He was a wankster, basically. And this is typically the shit that I'm actually talking about in this lovely live stream, known as Devil's Advocate or the Scythe. But I'm actually get to the main topic at hand when it's going down to this, which actually leads into like egalitarianism and feminism, basically, or aka as I call it, aka Gynocentrism, if it's feminism, basically. But I'm going to argue both points in this one, because it's Devil's Advocate on one channel, and it's basically Tren Scythe on this channel. So technically, I'm going to argue both points, and why one benefits one group of people, and why doing the other one wouldn't benefit that same group of people. Typically, is how it works. Egalitarianism, for those of you who don't know, egalitarianism is the practice of equality amongst everybody for all intents and purposes. That's all it really is. That's all it would ever be. It's basically equality across the board. It's what equality actually is. You hear these feminists always talk about they want equality. They don't want equality. They want gynocentrism. They want everything to be catered towards women, and they want all the perks and none of the things. So in all technicality, when it's all said and done, it's one of those things where you have to realize as a human being that a lot of this stuff is basically bullcrap for all intents and purposes. They don't want egalitarianism. They want the same old, but they want more perks and more benefits. The best way I can describe that is, before I was doing this live stream, well, before I got into another live stream, I actually had to fire a woman from a job, basically. Typically, I don't show up at the lab unless I got to fire somebody, or I got to play. We got to get the whole entire team together and make it work, basically, and actually, make up for lost time for all intents and purposes. Typically, the only reason why I show up at the lab. But I had to actually fire a woman at the lab. She was basically pixie-haired, blue-haired, short pixie-haired feminist, basically. And what she did was destroyed about 10 years worth of research in the lab, thinking that she was going to make it better, or do right, or do better, basically. So she technically destroyed 10 years of research in a matter of hours because she thought she was smart. The sad part about that is she was a equal opportunity hire, or one of those mercy hires, as I refer to them, because we need to meet a quota. But the sad part about that is we actually hired more women, so we were well over our quota, so we could have let her go anytime we wanted to. However, she fucked up the research, set us back 10 years. Now, if you know anything about me, when it comes to stuff like this, I typically have duplicates of what we're doing. Like if we have two, I got four. If we have one, I have two. If we have six, I have 12. Basically, it's typically how it works. So I always keep duplicates around just in case shit like this happens. Um, so what had happened was she had messed up the research, set the lab back 10 years of research. So I was basically called in by my supervisor to let her go. Now, if you know anything about me, look at my flags. Basically, the reason why I was hired in this position is because if you're going to fire somebody that's going to cry falsehoods or being treated unfairly as a woman, you typically want a black person there to pretty much you want the most minority black person there to do it. So basically, you want your black Latino basically there to actually basically be able to call her out because she only got one thing going for her. She's white and she's a woman, so all she got for her is she's a woman. And you're basically a minority, basically, and so a minority firing her looks better on paper than another white guy firing her, so, for all intents and purposes. So typically, my job is to fire people at the research facility. Okay, cool. So I fire her, let her go, tell her that she's no longer welcome back in the building. Basically, her security's up here to come get you and collect your things and get out of the lab, basically. So she threw a fit about it. And she threw a fit about it. And what happened was I had to literally call security. And luckily I got cameras in my office just for this particular thing. So what happens is now I have to basically call security. I got the security cameras running in each corner and off my computer as I'm calling security. She's throwing a fit on the floor basically, and security eventually comes up and she gets drug out of the building. Typically, that's how it works. After she got her stuff, she literally got drug out of the building and thrown to the corner, basically. So basically, what happens with that is I fired a feminist, and now she feels like she's been slighted, and she's not going to win that for the fact that I'm the one that fired her, not the supervisor. So what happened was, what I had to do was actually call a lot of people in, and I had to while I called a lot of people in, actually pulled out the samples that I had aside that I didn't let anybody know I had, basically, out of my refrigerator under my desk in my office. So I pulled out all the samples that they needed to continue the research, and I went to the chamber and I attempted to reverse engineer what she did to the research, basically, in those vials. So it took me about 1.5 to 2 hours to figure out what the fuck she did, and it took me another 5 to actually bring those specimens back up to from all 10 years wasted on this woman destroying 10 years of research, basically. So it took me like 3 hours to actually bring those specimens back up to 10 years, to the 10 years that we actually were working on for all intents and purposes. Not only did I bring it back up to 10 years, I basically added another years of research onto it on top of that when I reversed it, basically, what she did to the specimens and samples, basically. I was able to take the specimens and then, take it, dilute it, separate it, and centrifuge it and separate it and actually make it work for all intents and purposes. So basically, we hired a feminist. She thought she was smarter than everybody in the lab. She destroyed 10 years worth of research. I had to fire her, let her go, and then I had to bring those specimens. I had to actually pull out the specimens that I had in my refrigerator so the researchers won't feel dismay or feel slighted for all intents and purposes. So I pulled those specimens out of my refrigerator after I prepped them to make it so I have double the amount again. So I had to pull those two specimens out of there, the 2 racks of specimens out of there. I duplicated another 2 racks of those specimens, and I basically went on from there on top of reverse engineering the ones on which she destroyed in the other valves, basically in tubes and stuff like that. So I typically had to handle that myself, basically, so I can actually make it seem like no muss, no loss, basically. Nothing lost, nothing gained. And the sad part about that, when it comes to women like this, you typically have to hire women like this, sadly. The sad part about that is the only way you can actually stave off hiring random women that don't belong on a job is actually hiring women who actually qualify for the position. You may not want to hire none, But the only way around that is you're going to have to actually hire the qualified women to actually fill those positions. The sad part about that is when it comes to research, it's a very competitive field. So what you have to do is basically be able to hire like female managers or stuff like that, women that can actually manage a team, women that can women that could be like the secretary or the cheerleader basically to pep up the team to make sure they actually make it to their goals when it comes to research. You basically have to hire women around them as a support team to the actual laboratory workers or the researchers for this reason, so we can actually make things happen. So the researchers don't have to worry about this. So now you got a support team of women who all have important jobs to make sure that all the researchers are on par. They're not falling behind in schedule and things like that. So typically that's where the manager, the female manager, comes into play, where she can manage the team and make sure we're falling in the timeline and the criteria. Then you also have another manager, that's the office manager, that handles everybody in the office for all intents and purposes. Then you take and have a laboratory manager that's a female, even if she doesn't know the actual research. You basically want her to be able to understand laboratory SOPs just in case the health department comes in. That way she's on top of that and she can actually make that work. So typically we have one of those too. So we have a female who handles all the health department or the state and people like that come in. She basically walks around with them. So she's basically like the face of the lab. So she handles everything that the lab has to offer and stuff like that. She may not know what we're actually researching in the lab or know anything about what we're researching, but she knows about the political and or the red tape that we need to cut through so we can actually pass all things from the state or the health department or JACO, people like that for all intents and purposes. So basically that's what she does, that's what her knowledge is, and that's what she's skilled at doing. So typically you take that woman, you actually put a woman in that position. So then you get a woman that's in charge of keeping everybody on time. She may not understand what the research is, but what she does know is that we have a certain flow chart where we need to be at a certain goal at a certain time. And she basically will make the schedule so we can actually make it there. She needs to put more people on. She needs to take less people off, or she need to put some people on the weekend so we can make this work, or she need to schedule people for late hours basically so we can make it work. So typically that's how that works. So you basically need a woman that can actually do that too. And this is the only way you can stave off your job or your position or your company from being overran by women that don't know what the hell they're doing in your company. And typically, like I said, you want to have some researchers who are female on your staff. The sad part about that, when it comes down to it, when it comes to research women, when it comes to women that are in research, it's typically a very slim pool. And it looks kind of racist. It sounds kind of racist when it's all said and done, because most of your choices are Asian women, basically. Women from Asia, basically, or from Asian descent. That's your Indian women, that's your women from the Orients, and typically people like that. And every now and again, you'll get your random Muslim woman from a Muslim country in that mix too. So basically, you want to have all those people in place. So when the government comes looking at your place, talk about you need to hire more women. We got women managers. They're all managers. They all do something. They're all managers basically. So the sad part about that, having an office manager that's a female who handles the day-to-day and the paperwork works out nicely for you. Also get her a personal assistant. Just in case she gets overwhelmed. Just in case, shit happens, because how women's life, life comes at you fast when it comes to women. So it's typically one of those things, you want to get her a personal assistant. And the sad part about that personal assistant is probably going to be on par with her or just better than her for all intents and purposes. So just in case you have to replace her, that personal assistant is going to be the person that you replace her with. That way you no longer have to look outside to actually find somebody. So all you have to do is find her a personal assistant for all intents and purposes. You also want the laboratory manager who handles all let me rephrase that. You want the what's it called? The administrative laboratory manager that handles all this stuff too. And basically she's not going to know what's actually going on with the research, But what her job is basically going to be, she's going to be the face of the lab when she has to deal with JACO or JACO, the state health department, anything like them type of people from the joint, which is JACO's the Joint Commission, basically. But basically, she's going to deal with those people. And I say all of this because this is a part of this whole entire thing when it comes to gynocracy, the difference between feminism and egalitarianism. Basically, you want everybody to feel as though they're equal, even if they're not equal. You want them to have the feeling that they are. So the sad part about that, despite the fact that she's the laboratory manager, she's only the administrative laboratory manager. So she basically handles that stuff. The person who actually handles the lab is actually me. So anybody getting hired, anybody getting fired goes through me. Anybody getting hired goes to my supervisor. Basically is how it works. So now you have this in place. I basically told you that story so I can actually explain egalitarianism and why you shouldn't hire mercy people or people just because you need to fill a quota. You basically need to fill that quota off the bat so you don't have to worry about this. Is basically where I was going with this. That way you have the egalitarianism look, the egalitarian-esque going on in your lab, basically. That way you can't be forced to hire people who you don't need to hire, basically. So basically you do preventative care when you need to do that. The problem with egalitarianism is egalitarianism is all about equality. Again, I actually agree with TFM on this one when it comes to egalitarianism is not everybody's equal. I believe in equality of opportunity, not equality of outcome. So what I'm not finna do is pay them office women just as much as I'm going to pay those researchers because they don't have the same level of skill. And if I can pretty much lose an office person and replace them with a researcher, but what I can't do is lose a researcher and replace that person with an office person. You see what I mean? So it's one of those things where like you have to understand what's going on, and you have to understand the whole entire thing when it comes to egalitarianism versus feminism, which is gynocentrism. The overall problem with it is that if you have egalitarianism, women aren't going to be okay with egalitarianism. This is typically why feminism isn't about equality. It's all about boosting a woman and making a pedestal that she's already on and raising that pedestal even higher. Typically is how it works. Basically, women want to be to the point where no matter what they do, they can do anything and say anything to any racial class and they can get away with it with impunity. So basically, here's what I see with feminism. They basically went it to the point where they can literally use the N-word and everybody frowns upon it, but they can get away with using it. And if somebody hits them, it's wrong or, something like that, basically, because they're females, basically. So basically, because I remember I told a story about there's this college that took a vote and is passing around a petition to be over to all these white women are being from this college. I forget the name of the college. I had it in one of my last streams, but they basically passed around a petition so they can be able to identify being black. So typically what that means is now that they can identify being black, if they get this petition signed and they can actually get it passed in law, now they can actually do some of the racist shit that they really want to do and not be called out on it. Because the sad part of right now, the only thing holding a lot of the feminists back are conservative black men. Because it's very hard to come at a black man as a white woman and berate them and not look bad doing it for all intents and purposes. So basically, they're trying to actually take that off the table so they can be able to identify as black so that they can actually present themselves in a better light and get away with it for all intents and purposes. The problem with that is they don't quite have that capability to actually identify. They can identify as anything else, but they can't identify as black. This is the problem. That's the only thing hindering them from their goal in life. And the sad part about that is, like I said, a feminist's worst enemy is a black person or another minority for all intents and purposes, because there's nothing you can do to that minority. There's nothing you can say or do to that minority that won't paint you in a negative light at the end of the day. So typically minorities are feminists' weakness or their Achilles heel. Because the sad part about that, they'll try to use shaming tactics to get a person like me or, a Latino or, a black person that's a conservative to capitulate to what they're trying to preach. And the sad part about that is a lot of people aren't trying to pick up what they're putting down because it's not worth their time to pick up what they're putting down. It's typically how it works. The sad part about that is you run into a lot of these people who will try to exert their dominance, but then run into the brick wall of minorities. And I say this basically because I told this story about me having to fire a feminist because my supervisor wasn't willing to do it because he wasn't willing to actually take on the responsibilities and the fallout to firing this feminist. So basically, he put me there so I can actually combat stuff like that. Typically, is how it worked. So basically, I had to fire a feminist, and there's nothing she can do about it because she was fired. She wasn't fired by some evil white man. She was fired by an Afro Latina, which kind of sort of throws a monkey wrench in her defense about being fired by the evil white man. And so my supervisors kind of sort of a bit of an ass, but he understood what he was doing when he placed me in that position. It's typically how it works. So he actually was able to cover his ass and keep it moving. The sad part about it, when it comes to, like I said, egalitarianism, you can never have equality. It's basically the same argument I always bring when I talk about communism. It can never happen for the fact that we're all too selfish for all intents and purposes. The same thing goes for equality. We're all too selfish to have equality because we're not willing to sacrifice or give up any grounds that we actually have to have equality. Good example of that is if this was egalitarianism, let's just say an egalitarianism world, women would have to give up a lot of shit to actually be equal. Women would have to give up more shit than black people to be equal. The only thing that black people would have to give up is affirmative action and a couple other things like NAACP, a couple other things basically. And that's about it. Women have to give up, being treated like princesses, being put on a pedestal, being seen as the being seen as the weaker sex, basically, being seen as all this stuff, and they would have to register for draft, basically. So women would have to give up a lot of ground for egalitarianism. This is typically why women aren't going to go for egalitarianism because that will require them to actually be 100% equal. Black people are more likely to go with the egalitarianism than women are. Women are always going to fight you tooth and nail. The sad part about that, they're not willing to accept it. And it's one of those things that you have to accept as a society. And the sad part about that, for them to actually accept it, you would have to have a strong leader, like I said, to actually put their foot down and take away rights, basically. And that's the only way that you can actually pull it off. Because the sad part about that, even all these simps out here aren't willing to actually put up a fight. Like, really, soy boys putting up a fight. Think about that. That would be mind blowing to watch a soy boy put up a fight. It's typically how it works. They might or argue or cry about it, but that's about the extent that they're willing to do. They're not fin to actually riot against somebody who's a greater opposing force. Because if you ever notice, all these Antifa people and these Black Lives Matter people, they go to cities that they know that they can get away with in. It's basically like the whole entire conundrum when you're growing up. There's always that kid picking on the smallest kid, but he thinks he's tough, but he's picking on the smallest, most easiest target in the classroom or the smallest, most easiest target in a room. That's pretty much all it really is. They basically go to the cities that would allow them to do the stupid shit that they do. The sad part about that is typically why they don't come to a city like Pennsylvania anymore, Pittsburgh anymore, or a one where like everybody gets guns is typically for the same reason that nobody's willing to put up with that, and you're going to meet a lot of backlash, and nobody's going to let you just destroy shit for all intents and purposes, especially if it's like a part of a small community. It's simply how it works. So if you were to do that shit in, let's just say, if you were to pull that shit off in Victoria, Texas, you would have to duck a lot of bullets, and there'd be a lot of bullets sailing over your head at that point. It's typically how this shit works. What's up, Baron Yam? What's up, Shinobi One? What's up, America's DeVille? So pretty much what happens with that is feminists and the Antifa and all those people wouldn't be able to pull off that same stunt in places like Victoria, Texas, or places like anywhere where they have open carry for all intents and purposes. Because the sad part about that is there'll be a lot of dead people for all intents and purposes, especially in like the standing road ground, especially in the standing road ground places. There'd be a lot of dead people in those places if they pulled that off. This is typically why they go to places like California or Portland or New York, because they're willing to actually put up with that stuff and deal with that stuff for all intents and purposes. They're willing to actually let them destroy shit for the sake of Orange Man bad. It's pretty much how it works. That's the cold hard truth. This is typically why egalitarianism would never work on a mass scale, for the fact that at the end of the day, despite the fact that black people would actually give up rights to actually be equal, women won't, because women are selfish. Women are about themselves. Women ain't about us, they're about them. And the sad part about that is that's typically how it works. And it's basically like communism. That's pretty much how it works. The sad part about the same thing that goes for communism. We would never have, if we did have communism in America, it would never last that long, for the fact that everybody's selfish. Nobody's willing to equally give up shit or work at the same, like a good example. An astrophysicist is not willing to work for the same rate as a fucking store clerk. A fucking researcher is not willing to work. A researcher is not willing to work for the same money that a daycare worker is working for or a teacher is working for. It's just what it is. So the sad part about that, this is typically why communism would burn out very quickly in a place like America. On top of that, ain't nobody. I mean, I agree that, if we'll just say two scenarios will happen. Everybody doesn't give up their guns, or everybody does give up their guns. We're going to play devil's advocate on this. We'll say everybody doesn't give up their guns. Now you're going to have an all-out war. There's going to be a whole entire Waco, or the whole entire Waco, Texas thing all over again. So it's going to be one of those things that's going to be national news. And the sad part about that, if the government is communist, they don't really care how they look. So they're willing to destroy anybody and everybody that stands in their way for all intents and purposes. Let's just say the country goes communism. They're willing to actually pull out all the stops to eliminate anybody and everybody who stands in their way. That's one scenario. So all the people with guns will pretty much be dead within hours for all intents and purposes. Is the best way I can actually describe it to you. Playing devil's advocate. All right, cool. We'll play on the opposite side. We just say everybody does give up their guns. Not everybody gave up their guns. Now you're going to turn into a European utopia now, where everybody doesn't have a gun, but the government can do any fucking thing to you that they want. Okay, cool. The government is going to literally practice and force his will upon you, no matter if you like it or not. If you're a guy, you're probably going to catch it worse. Well, no, because if it's communism, you're basically going to have to either do it or get ran over or jailed, basically. It's simply how it works. The sad part about that, I actually see the latter happening more than the one before, because I don't really see somebody like, really laying their lives on the line over some guns, basically. I see a lot of people probably probably having a stockpile of guns hidden somewhere and coming back to fight another day. Yeah, that can actually happen. Yeah. But I see people giving up, like, maybe some arms that they probably weren't going to use anyway, or something that, to appease everybody to make it go away. Or they might go full on, give up everything for all intents and purposes. So either way, no matter how you play this, it's always going to be something where now, do you have the guns to fight another day, or did you give up all your guns and now you got to, pretty much capitulate to he's listening to Tupac and me at the same time. That's funny. I like that. Thanks, Pippin. But it's one of those things where now you have to actually be able to understand, that they had a stockpile or a cache of weapons, or did they give up all their weapons? It's typically what you're going to pretty much look for if you want to do a regime to overthrow the regime, if you want a group of people to overthrow the regime as it gets weak, basically. So it's one of those things where, like, maybe they'll give up all their weapons. Okay, we'll run with that idea. So they give up all their weapons. Now we have nothing to actually fight the government as they're getting weaker, unless we can convince or take out, small targets to quite possibly gain some munitions, basically, for all intents and purposes, the best way to do it. That'll be the only way we can do it, to actually fight a government that's actually getting weak. But the sad part about that is, usually when governments get weak, they start doing the most extreme shit in the whole entire world. It's simply how it works. They typically start, what they call it, their last dying breath, or the last flail, or the last fight, basically. It's simply how it works. So they'll basically go to the extreme towards the end of their reigns. We'll say that's one thing. We'll say they gave up. We'll say the people. Now we'll go with the other argument about they gave up part of their guns or some of their guns, basically, and they stashed some elsewhere. Okay, cool. Now that you know that they gave up part of their guns, or you only gave up part of your guns, now you have the ammunitions to fight a later war. Basically, you basically just leave it hidden, don't look for it, come back when the time is right. You go back and fight that war when you need to. It's simply how it works. I just argue egalitarianism, basically, um, and typically why it wouldn't work in the United States because women. Um, Now I'm going to argue feminism, aka gynocentrism. And this is the reason why egalitarian won't work, because women are put on such high pedestals that now, even though they got the government supporting them, like I said, I was talking about a welfare worker that was like couldn't wait to actually retire, basically, because it went from helping people to entitled motherfuckers at the welfare office, and now they got bulletproof glass because motherfuckers is trying to shoot at motherfuckers because that's how entitled they are. Now motherfuckers is bringing guns to the welfare office because they feel entitled to this money. Now all of a sudden, and the thing that I always asked about that is, if this person got a gun, do they really need to be on welfare at this point? Because I'm willing to bet that gun costs a decent amount of money to actually purchase. So if they have a gun, why do they still get welfare? That's my one problem with that. And so what will happen with communism is women were more likely to take communism than the rest of us for all intents and purposes. This is typically how this works. And the sad part about that is women are more likely to go with communism than men are. Men will probably fight a little bit, will probably give a little bit more pushback on this than women are. Basically, I'm arguing devil's advocate on this one. So women won't accept egalitarianism, but they will accept communism. But the sad part about that is, as the communism goes on for a good period of time, when it comes down to it, women will realize that communism isn't for them, because now you can't divorce somebody and take their shit now under communism, because equality, yay. Under communism, everybody's getting the same shit, so it's very hard to divorce somebody and take half their shit under communism rules, because now you don't have those benefits. On top of that, you also can't really speak out on the street anymore as a woman, because the sad part about that, like I said, the reason why communism sounds good to women, because women don't think that far ahead. Women don't really think things through when they actually pick things like that. So communism is going to sound good to women more than egalitarianism is, because if they're equal, that means they have to give up a shit ton of rights and a shit ton of ground that they've gained. Communism, it sounds good to them, and they're still getting cash and prizes. The only problem with communism is when they want to parade themselves out there in the middle of nowhere, and now they're all being arrested for having the titty march, basically, or the what they call it, the pussy hat march, or any of these marches that they hold near and dear will all be gone under communism. Sad part about that is that's pretty much how communism works. It sounds great until it's in power, then they start taking away your rights, and now you have little to no rights now. So the sad part about that is pretty much how this is going to work is you're going to be a bunch of women that's going to be happy with it for about 2, 3, maybe 4 years, depending on how long it goes. But then women are going to start getting disenfranchised or upset with it because it's not what they expected it to be. Because now they're not going to be able to march. The gay march is not going to be able to go on. The gay pride parade is not going to be able to go on. None of these parades that everybody hold near and dear. The slut walk is not going to be able to go on. None of this stuff is going to be able to go on. Because typically with communism comes a dress code for all intents and purposes. Typically when communism comes around, a bit of a dress code comes with it. And the sad part about that is women are going to have to dress more conservatively. They're not going to be allowed to look like hoes, in other words. They're going to have to be more conservative. They're allowed to wear a lot of other stuff, but they're going to have to be conservative about it for all intents and purposes. And this is typically why women are going to actually start reading and being upset with this shit. The sad part about that, a lot of the women are going to be capitulate to it for the fact that they're getting cash and prizes anyway. But then there's going to be a small section of women that's going to be like, well, men, aren't we going to do something? And the men are going to be like, no, you asked for this. Now you got it. Now you have to suffer. And it's pretty much how it works, because now the men are going to be like, you know what, fuck it, I don't even care anymore. Let this shit happen. And that's pretty much going to be men in a nutshell. The sad part about that is, like they were talking about with the 13% of men, is there's only going to be a small percentage of men that's going to want to fight this, and they're pretty much going to go regroup, figure out, plan, do all this stuff to basically, so when it starts falling and collapsing, they have a better chance of victory and taking over shit for all intents and purposes. It's typically how it's going to work. It's the cold hard truth. The sad part about that is what a lot of people don't realize is, like I was saying about the guns, if you take some people's guns away, I find it very hard. I would say you'll be very hard pressed to find somebody that's actually going to fight you straight up for all intents and purposes. Now, I hope that doesn't happen, and I hope people do fight. But like I said, you're going to be hard pressed to find people who are willing to. You're going to be hard pressed to find people willing to actually fight for their rights, basically, and their weapons for all intents and purposes. So that's one of the many problems you're going to run into when it comes to taking away guns, basically. On top of that, it'll be easy to take away women's rights for the fact that a lot of the people, if everybody had guns on the right, and you're just saying, we'll take away women's rights to vote, we'll take away women's rights, and we'll roll back all the shit that they actually have that they're benefiting from. Women are going to be upset by it, but women are eventually going to capitulate to it and actually go along with the thing, because women are pretty agreeable. Women aren't stupid. Women are dumb, but they're not stupid. They might do crazy shit, but they're not stupid. They typically know when shit is not going to benefit them if they start talking out the side of their mouths. Typically, so if you have a lot of right-leaning people with guns, and you're taking away women's rights, pretty much they're going to be mad about it, but they're really not going to put up a fight about it. When's the last time you actually see women actually fighting for something, literally? Like, think about that. Like, actually physically fighting for something as a large group of women. Like, you're just not going to see it. Like, they might try to jump one guy, but typically we see how it always pans out with them. But they're not gonna go against the full force of anybody. They might get their soy boy cucks to do it, and those guys to do it, but generally they're all gonna bail out, and they're all gonna not really be too much of a problem for all intents and purposes when it comes down to it. So they're pretty much going to fall along with the women. The sad part about that is, how would you go about actually implementing all this shit after it's all said and done? Now that you got all the women to capitulate, now you got all the soy boy cucks and simps and incels to basically, fall in line. Now it's all about how can you rule it to make it successful. So now, at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, now you're dealing with a serious thing. Now you're dealing with some shit that you're not willing to. I mean, you're willing to actually go along with, or you're not willing to actually. You might not be 100% okay with it, but for morality's sake, it actually benefits you. I mean, for morality's sake and livelihood's sake, it benefits you to just basically go along with it for all intents and purposes. And that's simply how a lot of men are going to actually go. They're going to pretty much go along with it. If they can keep their rights and their guns, they'll pretty much go along with it. But if the government takes their guns, you'll be very hard pressed to find somebody willing to actually fight for their gun rights. It's typically how it works. I mean, because at the end of the day, everybody talks about what they're going to do with their guns up until they actually have to use their guns. It's simply what they say about the meme about gangsters. Everybody's gangsters tell us time to do some gangster shit, basically. Then all of a sudden they got like, well, maybe we could pick this another day. Maybe we could do about this another way. Maybe we should do this a different day. Or maybe this, or maybe this is a bad time. They start getting second thoughts and they get cold feet for all intents and purposes. And that's typically how it's going to end up working for all intents and purposes, because at the end of the day, it's not going to be worth your time or effort to put in this work to do this shit for all intents and purposes. So it's one of those things that when you get these men together, they're not going to have the morality to actually fight. They're not going to have the morality to actually continue to battle, or want to battle this out to the very end. They're not going to have the gumption or willpower or fortitude to actually see it to the end. So typically, you're going to have to deal with a bunch of soy boy cucks that are willing to bow out very easily, or willing to actually take it on the chin, money shot style, basically, and they're not willing to actually do stuff like they claim they are. What's up, Billy the Goat? Welcome to the stream. So what happens with that now? You have a alternate reality where I've actually played out all the devil advocates to a certain extent. I didn't play it out fully, but you generally get the gist of it, how it's actually working when it comes to devil's advocate. Like, playing devil's advocate is actually pretty fun for the fact that you're able to dive into various different things to understand the outcome of those things and how far people are willing to go based on psychology. So I basically approached it from a psychological standpoint with the people that we got readily available today in America. We're typically not willing to do that. We're pretty much going to just give up, basically. I'm not going to say we'll roll over and die, but we'll pretty much just give up on our rights, basically. Because the sad part about that, like they always say, the second amendment's there just in case the First Amendment stops working or isn't working properly for all intents and purposes, or it's not working out to plan for all intents and purposes. So typically, you have the Second Amendment there to basically protect yourself from stupid shit like this. It's just in case your freedom of speech is being infringed upon. The Second Amendment is there to reinforce your First Amendment for all intents and purposes. Is usually how I say it. So you have your First Amendment, but just in case your First Amendment is being infringed upon or not being respected, there's always a Second Amendment to reinforce your First Amendment. That's usually how I always look at it, and that's pretty much how I always view it. So it's one of those things as a human being, you have to be ready to understand what's going on and what people are willing to do and what people's capabilities are. Because the sad part about that, a lot of these women that run around America today, they think they ain't going to be out there like Katniss Everdeen, basically, slaying it basically with a bow and arrow and shit like that, when in fact they're pretty much going to be prostitutes and hookers. That's pretty much what they're going to be doing. The sad part about that is you actually see glimpses of that now with the OnlyFans, basically. The sad part about that is if communism comes into play, OnlyFans is gone, Twitch Dottery is gone, all this stuff is gone. So if communism actually comes into play, there would be no more Twitch dots, there would be no more OnlyFans girls, there would be no more Instagram models, there would be no more of this shit, because the sad part about that is nobody can afford this shit under communism. Nobody has the extra disposable cash to afford this stuff. So typically, everybody's going to live a boring life that looks something like what is the name of that group of people in America? Amish or Mennonites, basically. So basically, everybody's going to live a very plain Mennonitian / Amish life, basically, when communism rolls out, for all intents and purposes. Think of Mao Zedong, but 1960s. I mean, not 1960s, but Gone with the Wind era style shit, basically. So, like, we were not going to be wearing a Chinese dress, basically, unless you're actually Chinese. They'll probably force you to wear that, and if you're African, they'll probably force you to wear dashiki. And basically, that'll be the best way to actually, be over to weed out stuff and keep it so people can't really revolt against you, because based on their clothing, you can't really sneak shit into their, unless you have a dashiki. So you'll probably have to, make them wear a tight, really, really tight dashiki, basically. And typically, that's basically what the government's doing now with black people in the skinny boy jeans. You're basically making them wear tight clothing, so it's very hard for them to be able to carry munitions and guns, basically, into a place, because it's very hard to carry a gun in some skinny boy jeans for all intents and purposes. So that's what you're basically dealing with the dumbing down and sissifying of black people. Put them all in skinny boy jeans and tight ass clothes. It's very hard to hide a gun. It's simply how it works, is what I say. So they're already doing it with the black culture when it comes to it, and the black culture doesn't even realize it's happening. And basically, if you're going to carry a gun in skinny boy jeans, it basically would stand out like a D print for all intents and purposes. So at the end of the day, when it's all said and done, everybody's going to know you have a gun in some skinny boy jeans. Which means it is what it is. Um, like I said, everybody talks a good game, but nobody's really about that life when it comes down to it. Everybody talks a good big game up until they actually have to put it on the line basically and make it work for all intents and purposes. It's typically how it works. So at the end of the day, when it comes to feminism, if feminism is not about equality. Feminism is gynocentrism for all intents and purposes, wrapped up nicely. It's not egalitarianism. Women will never accept egalitarianism. However, they will accept communism because it sounds nice and it sounds good at first. Or to argue that it wasn't done properly in this country, therefore we can do it properly. Problem is, no matter how you make it work, it's never going to be done properly, unless you're like one of the Scandinavian countries basically that actually made it work. Sad part about that is not too many people in America is willing to actually accept that lifestyle, because now you're getting taxed the hell out of. Now you really can't afford shit, but the trade-off is your government would take care of you. Now the sad part about that is in America, that'll pose a problem for the fact that nobody trusts their government in the first damn place to take care of anything. Hell, they can't even run Medicare and Medicaid properly. They can't even run, Social Security and all this stuff properly. So why the hell would I trust you with all this stuff under one umbrella? It's typically how it works. Because that sounds like a nice way to tax me and keep everything on a cheap and give me the lowest quality of care in the same time, or give me the give me give me low quality options for all intents and purposes is what I'm trying to say. Damn, I couldn't even get the word out that I was trying to say, that I really wanted to say, but I'll go with that one. Um, but yes, it's typically one of those things where like you have to understand why and how things go on. And the sad part about that, you have to understand people from a psychological standpoint and what they're willing and what they're not willing to do for all intents and purposes. Because a lot of people always talk about what they're going to do, but at the end of the day, it's one of those things like, yeah, you're not finna do that. Come on now, let's just keep it 100. And the sad part about that, you can usually tell those type of people when you run into those people what they're willing to do and what they're not willing to do when you meet those people. It's the cold hard truth. It's like everybody talks about what they'll do. Everybody talks about the, what they would do in any situation. But the sad part about that is at the end of the day, they're not. Like Billy the Ghost says, too much Xena warrior princess, basically. And the sad part about that, a lot of women think they can do this shit. But I only know of a few women in this world that can actually pull shit off on that level or close to that damn level. And it is what it is. Not every woman is skilled to do this shit. I know women that take martial arts that still fight like shit. I know women that think they're skilled in martial arts and still fight like shit. So it's one of those things where it's like you got to be able to understand your actual skill and look at your skill and actually understand your own capabilities and not try to overplay your capabilities or oversell your capabilities or overindulge in a fantasy of what your capabilities are for all intents and purposes. Because like I said, there are things that I understand as I get older, I'm gonna have to literally start using brain power so I can stay at the same level that I'm at now as a young man for all intents and purposes. So the older I get, the more logic, the more intelligence, the more strategy I'm going to have to use so I can stay at my peak performance for all intents and purposes. Now, I may not be at my peak performance trying to do the same shit I would do at this age, but the sad part about that is if you have the strategy and the strategy and the knowledge to do so, and you're going to use that to your advantage, you typically can keep up with. You typically can look like you're keeping up, and you're on par, or you're on par with your young self for all intents and purposes, if you're very smart about it for all intents and purposes. So the sad part about that is how can you actually make yourself look intelligent or feel intelligent or be intelligent? Or how can you make yourself a better version of yourself for all intents and purposes, the best way I could put it. And sometimes, like I said, I'm not going to be the fastest. When I get older, I don't expect to be, I don't expect to have this two-step or my speed or my strength when I start hitting 40, 45, 50, 50, 60, basically. I don't expect to have the same speed. The question is, what am I doing now, or how am I preparing myself mentally now so I can appear as if I actually have the same output and the same speed. The sad part about that, if you strategize properly and you practice now and have a backup plan, you could typically make it look like you're actually that fast still, or you're still on par, or you're still the shit. All it takes is strategy, um, and running through various scenarios to actually make it seem as if you can still keep up with your young self for all intents and purposes. Um, that's typically how it works. I know this, and I'm actually working on strategies and plans for when I actually start getting older up there in age, where I can still somewhat defend myself to somewhat of a high level or a high degree. Um, but typically, the best part of fighting is knowing when you can walk away, or as Bruce Lee used to say, the art of fighting without fighting. It's typically where you want to be. So, what you want basically is the ability to be able to look at the situation that you're in, understand the situation that you're in, and be able to assess it properly to know that you should walk away and not try to be Superman or Captain Save-A-Ho or anything like that for all intents and purposes. Um, it's typically how it works. So you basically want to be able to make this shit work for you in a manner where you don't have to worry about a lot of this stuff. Typically. So the irony to it is the way you go about it and the way you prepare yourself for this stuff is both mentally, physically, emotionally, for all intents and purposes. It's pretty much how it works. I really don't have very much for this stream. I basically just describe scenarios shallowly on Devil's Advocate on what could happen for all intents and purposes for egalitarianism and Gynocentrism and communism for all intents and purposes, and how it would actually pan out for all intents and purposes. I even played the whole entire. I played the devil's advocate for black people and minorities, basically, on how they would actually give up their grounds to actually accept egalitarianism, but also said that women won't accept egalitarianism because that will require them to give up way more grounds than everybody else under the sun. Because typically, women have more rights than everybody, and Native Americans and black people and everybody under the fucking sun. So it's one of those things where it's like they're basically a special class within America for all intents and purposes. But does anybody have any questions or anything that they want me to play devil's advocate on? Um, in the comment section, just type one if you do, and I'll wait. Type two if you don't. Um, and I'll wait to see what the number is basically, and I'll basically let you type out your thing, and we'll go from there basically. Um, so is there anything that somebody wants me to pay? Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, pretty much they will, and that's the cold hard truth. They'll use affirmative action. The sad part about that, they'll use affirmative action all the way till the end, basically, or they'll use the governments, or they'll basically use governments against these corporations because the governments give them grants for this shit too, and loans and grants and special aid basically for hiring certain people, which is the cold hard truth. So, and yeah, you're right. Feminism is a shallow mass grave. It's typically how it works. Does anybody have any more questions? What will happen if that happens? Typically, they won't kill them for various reasons. Um, being guerrilla warfare mode. Yeah, I know, right? I'm about to look at that Shinobi one definitely. Typically, what will happen is like the leftists aren't willing because what I said about the leftists, what I said about the leftists earlier is leftists only do things or go to cities and riot in cities that will let them riot for all intents and purposes. Like they're in Portland for obvious reasons. They're in Michigan and Chicago for obvious reasons. They're in New York for obvious reasons, and they're doing it in California, or as we call it, California, for obvious reasons. Because typically states like this would let them pretty much riot and do stuff like that. Like I said, you typically won't see the leftist leaning people in a place like Victoria, Texas, because there'll be a lot of bullets sailing past their heads in a heartbeat if you start destroying shit in Victoria, Texas. The sad part about that is feminism and the leftists and the whole entire the leftists and the BLM and Antifa aren't really about that life. They're really not. They talk a good game, but the sad part about that, when bullets start whizzing past them, they act like victims. A good example of that is the Hells Angels, or was it the Hells Angels, or was somebody else, when they rolled through Portland or something like that, or they all got out their way because they knew they weren't about shit and they weren't finna to do anything for all intents and purposes, because that's the fucking Hells Angels. You ain't finna fight the Hells Angels without getting your ass whooped. It's typically how it works. So or that biker gang in general, for all intents and purposes, is the best way to put it. So typically, anytime that they're faced with an actual threat, they typically back down. So the sad part about that, when it comes to communism, because they're so rooting for it so badly, they'll typically capitulate and accept everything for the first several years. The sad part about that, they'll start complaining because they don't have all the rights that they wanted within communism for all intents and purposes. So typically how it's going to work is communism is so bad that it's basically a nice way of saying controlled egalitarianism for all intents and purposes. So communism is a pretty bow for overreach and controlled egalitarianism for all intents and purposes is the best way to describe it, because everybody's going to be equal no matter if they like it or not under communism. Everybody's going to be treated the same. Women aren't going to be able to get all the cash and prizes they want if they're with a man and they divorce a man. And the sad part about that, under communism, women ain't going to be able to live their best lives or speak their truths anymore, because that's all going to be pretty much thrown out the window, because it's communism now. You can't do the female march. You can't do the gay march. You can't do the gay pride parade. You can't do the lesbian pride parade. You can't do the pussy walk. You can't do the slut walk. You can't do none of that shit anymore because it's communism now. And technically how that works is it's all controlled. And you got secret police that'll pretty much, round you up and put you in your place if you need to, for all intents and purposes. So the sad part about that is they're all going to end up under one umbrella. They might be unhappy, but they're going to be too scared with all the demonstrations that the Communist Party is going to show in public. So technically what's going to happen with the Communist Party is there's probably going to be like televised, killings in front of people, kind of like back in the day when they had slavery and they had to lynch somebody. Basically, everybody used to gather their picnic baskets and a blanket and watch their lynchings. Technically, that's what's going to happen under communism. The minute somebody get out of line, there's going to be a public demonstration on what happens to you if you fuck up or go against us. Basically, it's simply how it's going to work. It's basically like the Tiananmen Square thing with the one Chinese guy. I'm tough and I'm strong and I'm going to fight for China. Then he got ran over by a tank. Not so tough anymore when your tank tracks, for all intents and purposes. And I hate to sound very crass about it and sound very mean and make it a joke, but it literally is. Sometimes you got to know when to fold them. A tank wasn't your battle, my guy. A tank really wasn't your battle, my guy. And it might have looked bad on TV, but if you're communist, they don't care how they look on TV. They don't care how people view them on TV, for all intents and purposes. They're communists. What the fuck they care about social media and shit like that? What services would be cut first? Basically anything that goes against Communist Party. Now you'll still get your everybody will it'll pretty much be like the Andrew Yang thing, where everybody gets $1,000 for the most part. So it's one of those things where like you'll get a stipend every month. Basically, it's not going to be a big stipend, but you'll probably get a stipend if that's how it works. Or it'll probably be like everybody works, but everybody gets the same pay as they work, for all intents and purposes. So it's going to be one of those things. So the sad part about that is when women go to marry men, because they'll have to, because everything will be stabilized to the point where like everything's so equal, A teacher's getting paid the same as a rocket scientist. A CEO is getting paid the same as a fucking, you know, a fast food clerk, basically, or a gas station attendant, basically. So it's one of those things where women are going to have to marry again for all intents and purposes because they'll be forced to because they're not making that much money. Um, the best way to describe that is remember how America was before women got into the workforce. Men got nice raises, they got nice pensions, they got nice everything, and all that under the sun. They got a lot of nice everything for all intents and purposes when it took place. Now the sad part about that is when women enter the workforce, the wages stay stagnant for the next 70 years, 60, 70 years for all intents and purposes. So wages will always be stagnant because there's women in the workforce, and that's unskilled labor that you pretty much don't have to pay that much. So now you can pay at any rate you want. And this is typically why you always hear the leftists always trying to raise the minimum wage, basically. Because they'll say, well, we can't live on this wage. Well, the problem is you're not supposed to live on that wage. That wage is supposed to be a stepping stool to make your life better so you can actually live at a better wage. That's typically how this shit works. So I see the first things going would be all the safety nets that, all the safety nets and all the unity community that's going on now, basically, will all be gone. The NAACP will be gone. The United Negro College Fund gone. All these Pell Grants for women gone. They'll all be gone, or they'll all be consolidated under one roof. And everybody will be able to go to school for all intents and purposes, and everybody will be able to participate in healthcare and stuff like that. So the sad part about that, all those bloated entities and all those bloated government entities that we have now will all be gone. Everything will be consolidated under one roof or two roofs or three roofs or five roofs, basically. So it's one of those things where it's like the armed forces, how we got like 5 branches, it'll probably be consolidated under one branch. It'll be consolidated under like just the armed forces, basically. And that's basically how it'll be handled. And you'll have your various people that are control. It'll basically be like, think of it like a corporation. What'll happen is it won't be, the Marines, the Navy, the Army. It'll still be that, but it'll be under a corporation. It'll basically be departments under a corporation, basically. So what'll happen is, you got the person in charge of all of that. Then as you go down, you got the person in charge of this and that. You got the person in charge of this and that, and it branches out basically. And it's like now you got the person that's the head of the Navy, the person that's the head of the Marines, the person that's the head of the Army, Air Force, all these people, the Coast Guards, basically. But the sad part about that, they're all controlled under one roof. So it'll be more organized and more put under one roof and bought together for all intents and purposes. So what'll end up happening is it'll all be consolidated, and it'll be able to save money that way. Then a lot of these other programs and all this other shit will go on for all intents and purposes, like that'll probably go away as well too. Will we still speak English as the main language? It depends. It depends on what country decides to sweep through and and put their necks on people. Typically, how I see it is, I see one of 3 things happening. To be honest with you, if it comes down to a country invading us and taking us over, I would say either A, learn Russian, B, learn Mandarin, or C, learn Arabic. That's typically how I see it at this point in time. Learn Russian, Arabic, and or Mandarin. So that'll probably be the languages that we'll all probably be speaking, considering that China owns a good chunk of our debt. They don't own a majority of it anymore. I think they sold it off, and somebody else, a private investor owns majority of our stock. Majority of our debt now, but that's pretty much how it's going to actually come into play. So we'll probably end up being we'll probably have to learn how to speak one of those three languages or all three languages for all we know. It's simply how that's going to work. Um, what I see with that happen is there'll probably be a lot of petty squabbling, but there'll be somebody like a Gaddafi that'll pretty much bring it back together again. To actually, in my vision, there'll be somebody like a Gaddafi that'll pretty much make it work again for all intents and purposes. The irony to it this time is you won't have a superpower trying to make you look like trying to make you look bad in the process of doing so. So it'll end up being one of those things where, like, I believe that'll be another Gaddafi that'll rise in Africa and the Middle East for all intents and purposes, and they'll probably unify it for all intents and purposes. Is the best way I can actually put it to you. So I actually see if a lot of these countries were, you know, a lot of these countries will still fight for a little bit, but then there will probably be somebody like almost like how like the Mongols are fighting and Genghis Khan unified them. Basically, it'll be the same thing for Africa. I basically see once all these major countries get out of the mix and start pulling back on a lot of the resources that they're taking from a lot of these countries. I see a person rising up and actually unifying the country and making it a better country for all intents and purposes. It'll still have its problems, but generally it'll work out much better once everybody starts to have a better way of life and a better way of living for all intents and purposes. As long as the leader's not, pulling a what's his name from Venezuela with all the money basically that he can make basically. As long as he's not pocketing it or sending it offshore or doing stupid shit with it, they'll be fine. The minute he starts doing that, then it'll go back to the same mess that it's actually in. The question is, can you actually trust that leader not to do the stupid shit that they are? Will do. But I do see a lot of the Middle Eastern countries actually unifying. I do see a lot of the maybe not the Sunnis and Shiites, but I do see the Sunnis unifying with other Sunni countries. I see the Shiites unifying with other Shiite countries. And the sad part about that, maybe somewhere down the line, further down the line, they all might unify, but I highly doubt that'll ever happen. If it does, I'll be shocked. But typically, I don't really see it happening for all intents and purposes, unless they could put aside their petty differences and squabbles for all intents and purposes. Do I think? I don't think it ever worked. Maybe Cuba. Well, Cuba's kind of sort of weird for the fact that Cuba's kind of weird for the fact that it's not the fact that it survived it. It's not the fact that it worked. It's the fact that everybody put embargoes on Cuba because it was a communist country and it was in its backyard for all intents and purposes. So all the superpowers basically, well, just America basically treated them like redheaded stepchildren for a while Canada still had an open line of communication with them. So the reason why it actually worked well for Cuba, I'm not going to say it worked well. The reason why it appeared that it worked well for Cuba is because that at the end of the day, a lot of these other countries still had a line of communication and still supported Cuba and still supported tourism to Cuba for all intents and purposes. It's typically how that works. So it's one of those things where like you have to understand that whole entire concept and dynamic on why it looked like it somewhat worked for Cuba. Basically, there was a lot of countries that didn't really agree with the whole entire United States stance, and they still kept an open line of dialogue and communication with Cuba. Other than that, I think if they didn't have that, Cuba would be gone, long gone. If Cuba didn't have those multiple lines of dialect with those many different countries, Cuba would have collapsed a long fucking time ago. Cuba would be no more. Basically, we wouldn't be calling it Cuba no more. It would just be nothing. Or all the people would pretty much be breaking camp to get out of it for all intents and purposes, instead of like some people breaking camp to get out of it. So it'd be one of them things where it would have completely collapsed and it would have been decimated and it would be no more for all intents and purposes. I think that would end up way worse than Venezuela if they didn't have the lines of communications that they did for all intents and purposes. Um, or the lifelines that they did with other countries. Um, So yeah, I agree with that. I would agree with that. Um, will communists will communists of the Americamis join forces with China and become a superpower? I can actually see that happening. Yeah, I can actually see that happening because typically how it would work is like you would actually forge new allies because 9 times out of 10, a lot of your allies now won't be willing to work with you if you're a communist country. It's typically how it works. It's one thing with Cuba, it's a totally another thing with another superpower turning into a communist country. 9 times out of 10, you'll make a lot of enemies with the European Union and you know a lot of the countries over there for all intents and purposes. So your only footholds will be Russia, China, North Korea for all intents and purposes is the best way I can describe it to you, and maybe a few other small communist countries that develop around there. You'll have Venezuela on this side. You'll have a couple other countries basically on that side, on top of those three that I've actually named. So it's one of those things where it's like it'll eventually like it'll eventually like don't have no choice but to become a superpower, or or what they refer to it now as the BRICS nation. America, I could see America being a part of that nation for all intents and purposes, and the UN actually dissolving for that reason. Um, or the UN probably making a path or a seat for all these other countries that are communist countries and trying to get them to work together. I can see that happening, but I can't really see a lot of the European countries like being okay with America being a communist country. I can't even see Canada being okay with America being a communist country if they live out their whole if they outlive their feminist ideology that's going on there now. Um, yeah, like you said, think Firefly the movie. Um, yeah, true. Doing a certain percentage of it, like I said, if all hell breaks loose and people do get help, one of those three countries will probably be the language that we'll probably either be speaking. We'll probably still speak English, but we'll probably have to learn one of those many languages, basically, depending on who decides that they want to take over. Let it be China, one of those two countries. Let it be China or Russia, basically. Well, I said Mandarin, Arabic's Mandarin, or Russian, basically. So we'll probably have to learn those languages, sadly, for all intents and purposes. I have so many. See about yeah, I answered that basically. They would have no choice but to become a superpower with that. Those people. Did the tank roll him? Oh yeah, that tank ran his ass over. That tank ran his ass over. He was tank tracks. He was literally tank tracks, pimping. Um, and they say the theater's dead. Yeah, pretty much. Let's see. Anything else? They never show it. There is actually a video of it actually happening on the internet somewhere. I've actually seen it recently. I don't think it's on YouTube anymore, but I literally seen it recently on one of these other platforms of the Chinese guy getting ran over by a tank. So I know it's still out there because I actually seen it all. I've seen it multiple times throughout the many years. Um, I'm gonna try to pull it, and I'll probably put it on my BitChute on my brand new tube, because I don't think YouTube would allow me to put that up there because of the gory graphic violence, basically. Yeah, pretty much. Well, the problem is though, if America collapses and falls to communism, that's pretty much the royal bloodlines world police. So if they're communists now, it's not really going to pan out in their favor for all intents and purposes. Because typically, what Putin speaks out against the New World Order and stuff like that for all intents and purposes. Putin always speaks out against it. Um, a lot of Xi Jinping does every now and again. So typically, if the United States falls, that's pretty much the bloodlines world police that falls, if you know what I mean, because the United States pretty much polices the whole entire world. And if they grew big enough, they pretty much would police the whole entire universe for all intents and purposes if they had the finances to do so. It's simply how it works. But the sad part about that, if they fall, then they would literally have to raise their own army or unify the European Union to remotely have a chance to actually do anything or go against somebody like the United States for all intents and purposes. So you would have to unify a shit ton of countries to do so. And they would have to make it quick and make it very fast. Because what's going to happen is, like I said, you're going to have Venezuela, you're going to have various other communist countries that can't really promote too much stuff like Venezuela and Cuba and a couple other countries, but you're going to have like world powers like the new communist United States, or as I always call it, USSA. You're going to have the USSA, you're going to have Russia, you're going to have China, you're going to have North Korea, and random other small countries all under one umbrella. So typically how it's going to work is you're going to have to build an army and actually make it so that it rivals all those countries' armies. And the sad part about that is very hard to do when America has all these capabilities and have all these equipment now. So you would literally have to do like some serious development for your armed forces so you can even remotely meet the requirements that, meet the standards or the capabilities of Russia. On top of that, now you got to meet the capabilities and standards of United States military and army for all intents and purposes, the Marines and the Navy for all intents and purposes. So now you're going to have to do a lot of development or throw a shit ton of money into war development, basically, so you can catch up to all these countries. Because right now, China's working on a really, really ridiculous sized aircraft carriers for the future, as well as a stealth carrier, stealth battleships, and a few other things for all intents and purposes, along with Russia. And I think the United States, has started the research on that stuff too. If they've already started the research on it and are basically trying to make it work too. So it's one of those things. If they have all this stuff, then you really got to put money into your military industrial complex so you can remotely catch up to these people and make it work. Was all this planned? I don't think communism was planned. I think communism is a thorn in the side. If we're going to talk about if we're going to go black pill, communism is a thorn in the side to them for all intents and purposes. This is typically why America has never failed at communism, and they probably made sure it never failed at communism. And now they're probably on their heels right now, and probably pacing in their quarters, trying to figure out if America is going to fall to communism. The sad part about that, if America falls to communism, that's going to put a big damper in their plans, I believe, if it falls to communism. That's typically how it works. I don't really believe that the elites have communism in mind, to be honest. I don't believe that communism is in their wheelhouse for all intents and purposes, is the best way I can describe it. Because communism is pretty much a thorn in your side, like I said. And you're going to need like countries that actually can agree on something like the UN and get together for all intents and purposes. And if you have communism and you have a bunch of world powers literally out there with a bigger military might, more men than you to put on the ground than you, more air to ground capabilities or sea capabilities, seafaring capabilities, along with air supremacy, it's going to pose a big threat to the elites, which is sad. And the sad part about that is, in a way, I want to see, if that is the case, I would like to see communism come into play, even though I know it's going to collapse, because it's going to make the elite sweat. I believe. I don't believe communism is a part of their plan. I don't believe communism is a part of their wheelhouse at all. Like I said, I believe communism is a hiccup or like I said, a thorn in their side or something that's a major setback for all intents and purposes. Is the best way I can put it. So in a way, I think communism is good because it goes against the elites narrative and it goes against what the elites want to some extent. Um, so at the end of the day, that's the only thing that it would actually ever be good for. Because I don't believe the elites want communism. I don't believe the elites want any of this shit for all intents and purposes. Because with communism, you have more of a robust society to pick from and put out there on a battlefield for all intents and purposes and make battle ready. So we can have, let's just say, we can have a million people tomorrow. Let's just say if we had communism, we can have about like 200 million people out there ready to go. I mean, 200 million people out there ready to go for battle, basically, is the best way I could put it to you. So it's one of those things where if you have 200 million people out there ready for battle, that's more than probably all the European countries put together. They can muster up to remotely fight. Then you got the Russians over there with 1 million to 4 million people ready to go for battle. Then you got China over there with about the same amount. Then you got North Korea over there with, I think, rounding somewhere close to that. So that's like millions and millions and millions of people ready to go to battle. And the sad part about that, Great Britain doesn't have that kind of armed forces. Same with France, and they don't even have them kind of numbers for all intents and purposes. So that'd be overwhelming for them. It would be like a one-sided fight for all intents and purposes when it's all said and done. Just like a good example of that is if let's just say if America decided to take an isolationist approach and it decided to pull out of the UN altogether and ignore everybody in the world, Russia and China can pretty much steamroll the rest of the countries. Russia and China can pretty much steamroll everybody else under the sun. And that's the Cold War truth. It's sad, but it's so true. And it's one of those things where it's like they could do it without even blinking an eye or batting an eye for all intents and purposes when it comes down to it, because they just have this massive ground forces, and they have these massive they still have like air superiority and capabilities for all intents and purposes. And the sad part about that is there's really nothing in the European Union that can really combat the MiGs and the what's the other one that they got up there too now? And then they got then China got this own thing too. So when it comes down, was it Su? Yeah, the Su. Not this. No, Russia got the Su and the MiGs, and China has something else. I forget the name of they're two lovely planes that are very, very nice. So at the end of the day, that'll probably end up being one of those things what you'll have to worry about. Um, yeah, pretty much on that one. But the sad part about that is if they go communist, if America goes full communism, now they have a bigger problem to deal with. Now they have a bigger threat for all intents and purposes to deal with. ISIS. Okay, House of Red is Templar. Okay, which is a religious order. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, yeah, pretty much. If if you tax everybody to hell, they can't really fight, or they can't afford to fight because they have to afford their way of life basically and their standard of living for all intents and purposes. So you're not finna go out there and really do something if you're going to miss a day of work basically. Because 9 times out of 10 under communism, you probably won't get all the amenities of vacation days and shit like that for all intents and purposes. And 9 times out of 10, if they go real extreme communism, they'll probably be working for free anyway. So you're definitely not earning no shit. If they go very extreme, but if they go, regular communism, they'll probably just end up basically, working for peanuts basically, and they'll be working for money, but then they'll be taxed to hell, so they'll be working for peanuts at that point. We got Sean Connery. Yeah, that sounds great and all, but Sean Connery is a part of the. Well, yeah, they got Sean Connery. Yeah, I'll give you that. Yeah, and again, he is a European, so yeah, the Europeans decide to link up and handle that properly. Having Sean Connery on your side might work, jokingly. um, wow, really? I think it might be a tad bit more than that. Shinobi one. Oh, you talking about for war? Are you talking about for wartime? If y'all did all that, y'all would have 5 million people, or you're talking about if we sent all the women from America, all the women, men, and women from America to New Zealand, that would pretty much be that. Because I'm thinking you mean all the people in New Zealand. That sounds about right. Yeah. He would start having child soldiers like you're in Africa did after a while. Let's see, Jay Z, China Jay Z jet. It's called the Jay Z jet, really? Yeah, close enough. Sounds about right. They all start with J's or Q's and shit. Close enough. I think their fighter jet now is like the J-20 and the J-31 now, from the looks of it. Yeah, the J-20 and the J-31. No, the J-31's got replaced by something else. Basically, I'm trying to remember. Is it the Sioux or is it this one, the H-20? Oh, apparently they have a stealth bomber too that went into operation recently. The H-20. So yeah, that there's always that H-20, H-20, the J-20, and a couple other planes. Basically, they have in their jizz jet. I like that jizz jet. For real. I sure am. Let's see, jizz jet. Immigration. Okay, yeah. So yeah, you would actually have five. You have 5 million strong, basically, if you gave children guns, basically. Question is, would New Zealand actually do that though? Just like they'd be like Australia. Would Australia actually do that to defend themselves though? It's typically the question you have to ask yourself. Are they willing to give up their their gun free tradition to actually give everybody back a gun so they can defend their country? Is a question that you literally have to ask yourself. Um, yeah, that's about it. Any more questions, anyone? One's for yes, two's for no. Anyone? Everyone? Well, if that's all the questions you have, arm the chicken. This guy. Arm the chickens. Pretty much, that's what you'll end up having to do for all intents and purposes, is arm the chickens. So it'll end up being one of those things too. So yeah. But yeah, if that's it for everything in the chat, y'all have a good night. Be blessed and stay good to yourselves. Treat yourselves like milk, do nothing but spoil yourselves, and always improve upon yourselves and make yourself the better version of yourselves. Y'all be blessed and have a good night.